In a world where we often equate power with wealth and status, the most profound acts of courage sometimes come from those with the least to give. Consider a small southern restaurant where a black waitress named Amara Johnson moved quietly between tables, carrying not just plates of food, but the weight of daily discrimination and financial struggle. Yet within her burned a fierce compassion that no hardship could extinguish, a light that would soon illuminate the darkest corners of human judgment and transform a moment of crisis into one of unexpected grace. Have you ever noticed how quickly we assign value to people based on their appearance, their job, or the color of their skin? We see a waitress and assume we know her story. We see a wealthy man in an expensive suit and believe we understand his struggles. We witness a child in distress and jump to conclusions about parenting and discipline. These snap judgments build invisible walls between us, walls that seem impenetrable until someone brave enough decides to tear them down with nothing but raw humanity and unwavering kindness. What happened that rainy Thursday afternoon at the Blue Magnolia wasn't just about a waitress stepping in to help an autistic boy having a meltdown. It was about the moment when a millionaire father, a man accustomed to solving problems with money and influence, stood helpless as a woman who could barely pay her rent showed him what true wealth looks like. It was about how a single act of compassion exposed the hollow nature of prejudice and forever changed how a powerful man saw the world and himself. If this story resonates with you, hit that like button right now. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up for another person when no one else would? Or perhaps you've been that person yourself? Share your experience in the comments below, because these moments of human connection deserve to be celebrated. Amara Johnson wasn't born into privilege. At 32, she'd spent nearly half her life in service jobs, the last 5 years at the Blue Magnolia. Each morning, she rose before dawn in her small apartment on the east side of town, where the rent consumed almost 2/3 of her monthly income. The remaining money stretched thin between utilities, groceries, and the community college classes she took 2 evenings a week, pursuing a degree in social work one painstaking credit at a time. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, now bore the subtle calluses of someone who carried heavy trays for hours on end. Her smile, though genuine, masked the bone-deep exhaustion that came from standing for 10-hour shifts. Yet there was a quiet dignity in how she carried herself. Shoulders back, chin lifted, eyes clear and observant. Amara had learned early that dignity was something no one could take unless you surrendered it first. The Blue Magnolia stood at the intersection of two worlds, the gleaming financial district with its glass towers and the historic neighborhoods where generations of families had lived through changing times. The restaurant itself reflected this duality. Crystal chandeliers hung above worn wooden floors, and white linen tablecloths covered tables that had served customers for decades. It attracted an eclectic clientele, business executives in tailored suits, tourists seeking authentic Southern cuisine, and locals who'd been coming since childhood. For Amara, each shift brought subtle reminders of her place in the social hierarchy. There were the customers who snapped their fingers to get her attention, the ones who spoke slowly as if she might not understand complex orders, and those who left meager tips despite impeccable service. The restaurant's owner, Mr. Patterson, consistently assigned the most lucrative sections to her white colleagues, leaving Amara with tables near the kitchen or restrooms, areas known for smaller tips and higher complaints. What sustained Amara through these daily indignities wasn't blind optimism, but a profound understanding of human nature. She'd witnessed how pain could transform people into their worst selves, and how a moment of kindness could break through even the hardest exterior. Each slight she experienced became not a reason to harden, but an opportunity to practice the compassion she believed could heal a fractured world. In a society that often valued people based on their bank accounts or backgrounds, Amara measured worth by how one treated others when nothing could be gained in return. That Thursday afternoon, rain pelted against the windows of the Blue Magnolia, driving in customers seeking shelter and warm food. The kitchen hummed with activity as orders piled up. Servers wove between closely packed tables, balancing loaded trays above their heads. The symphony of clinking silverware, animated conversations, and kitchen commands filled the air with a constant buzz that made even regular customers raise their voices to be heard. At precisely 1:47 p.m., the front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool air and two figures that seemed to momentarily pause the restaurant's rhythm. Victor Sterling entered first, tall, commanding, dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of custom tailoring and significant wealth. His presence carried the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Yet his eyes betrayed a wariness, scanning the crowded space with concern rather than authority. Behind him followed Malik, his 10-year-old son. The boy's fingers clutched a small toy car, turning it over repeatedly in a practiced motion. Large noise-canceling headphones partially covered his ears, a necessary buffer against the overwhelming sensory input that threatened to flood his nervous system. Malik's eyes darted around the room without quite meeting anyone else's, observing everything but connecting with nothing. Victor's hand rested gently on his son's shoulder, a protective gesture developed through years of navigating public spaces that weren't designed for children like Malik. His autism meant that unpredictable environments could quickly transform from merely uncomfortable to utterly unbearable. The tight line of Victor's jaw revealed the tension of a father perpetually prepared for the judgment of strangers. Amara noticed them immediately. She recognized the familiar signs, the headphones, the repetitive movements, the protective parent. Without hesitation, she approached them with a warm smile. "Welcome to the Blue Magnolia," she said, making eye contact with Victor while keeping her voice soft and movements deliberate. "Would you prefer our corner table by the window? It's quieter there, and the lighting is gentler." Victor's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Yes," he nodded. "That would be perfect. Thank you." Amara guided Victor and Malik to the corner table, setting down menus and water glasses with careful precision. For the first 20 minutes, the meal progressed smoothly. Malik focused on arranging and rearranging the salt and pepper shakers, while Victor ordered for them both: chicken tenders for his son, a steak for himself. The corner provided some buffer from the restaurant's chaos, but as the lunch rush intensified, so did the noise. A large party of 8 was seated at a nearby table, their boisterous laughter punctuating the air like thunderclaps. The kitchen doors swung open more frequently, each time releasing a burst of clattering pots and shouted orders. For most diners, these sounds blended into acceptable background noise. For Malik, they began to form an assault on his senses. It started with small signs. His fingers tapped faster against the table surface. His breathing grew shallow. The toy car in his hand moved with increasing speed as he twisted it over and over. Victor leaned closer, whispering reassurances, but the storm building inside his son couldn't be calmed with words alone. "It's okay, buddy. We'll eat quickly and go soon," Victor promised, his voice tight with growing concern. At the next table, a woman in designer clothing glanced over as Malik began to rock slightly in his chair. She nudged her companion, nodding in their direction. "Some people really need to teach their children how to behave in public," she said, her voice deliberately loud enough to carry. "Exactly," her companion agreed. "If you can't control your kid, stay home." Victor's face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame. He'd heard these comments before, too many times to count, yet they still cut deeply. His hand moved protectively toward Malik, but the gesture came too late. The crash of a dropped tray from across the restaurant became the final trigger. Malik's hands flew to his headphones, pressing them tighter against his ears, as a low moan escaped his lips. His rocking intensified, and the toy car clattered to the floor as his arms began to flap rapidly, his body's desperate attempt to process overwhelming stimuli. Whispers rippled across nearby tables. A businessman checking his watch muttered something about proper parenting. To his colleague, an elderly couple requested to be moved to another section. The atmosphere around their corner shifted from indifference to open hostility. "Sir, perhaps you could take him outside until he calms down," suggested a patron from the adjacent table. Victor's expertise in corporate boardrooms offered no solution here. The man who commanded respect in financial circles now sat helpless, unable to shield his son from judgment or ease his distress. "Mr. Patterson, The restaurant manager appeared beside Amara as she refilled water glasses at a nearby table. His thin smile did nothing to soften the hard edge in his voice. "Amara, you need to handle that situation immediately," he hissed, nodding toward Malik and Victor. "We're getting complaints. This isn't a daycare center. It's a fine dining establishment." "That child is clearly having some sort of episode," he continued, straightening his tie. "Either they get him under control or they need to leave. I don't care who his father is or how much money he has. Our other customers shouldn't have their meals ruined." Amara glanced at Victor, the desperation in his eyes, the protective arm around his increasingly distressed son, then back at her manager's unyielding expression. In this moment, she stood at a crossroads, weighing her precarious financial situation against what she knew in her heart was right. Amara set down her water pitcher and straightened her apron. The weight of her next decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. In one direction lay job security, and in the other, the moral compass that had guided her life. With a deep breath, she turned to her manager. "Mr. Patterson, I need just 5 minutes. I can help them," she said firmly. Before he could object, Amara walked deliberately toward Malik and Victor's table. Rather than hovering above them, she knelt down beside Malik, placing herself at his eye level. The boy's distress had escalated. His body rocked frantically, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. "My name is Amara," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the restaurant noise, yet somehow clear enough to reach Malik. She made no attempt to touch him or stop his movement. Instead, she pulled a small notepad and pen from her apron pocket. "I like to draw when things get too loud for me," she continued, her pen beginning to move across the paper. "Sometimes it helps me focus on just one thing instead of everything at once." With quick, fluid strokes, she sketched a simple car, similar to the toy that had fallen to the floor. Then she added details: wheels with intricate spokes, windows that reflected tiny clouds, even a miniature driver with a smiling face. Throughout her drawing, she maintained a gentle narration, her voice a steady anchor in Malik's storm. "Look at those wheels turning, round and round. The driver is taking a peaceful drive through the countryside. It's quiet there, just the sound of wheels on the road." Gradually, Malik's rocking slowed. His gaze, initially darting everywhere and nowhere, fixed on the emerging picture. His breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to deepen and regulate. Victor watched in astonishment as his son's hands unclenched and his shoulders lowered from their tense position. When Malik seemed calmer, Amara slid the drawing toward him. "Would you like to add something to our picture?" she asked, offering the pen. To Victor's amazement, Malik accepted it, carefully drawing a small dog in the car's back seat. Only then did Amara rise and turn to address the other diners, many of whom had been watching the interaction with expressions ranging from impatience to curiosity. "I want to thank everyone for your patience," she began, her voice quiet yet commanding respect. "Malik here has autism, which means his brain processes sensory information differently than most of ours do. What might be background noise to us can feel like a physical assault to him." She gestured toward the boy, who was now focused on adding details to the drawing. His reaction wasn't misbehavior or poor parenting. It was his nervous system responding to overwhelming input. Just as we wouldn't judge someone for using a wheelchair, we shouldn't judge Malik for how his brain works. The woman who had made the earlier comment looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushing. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young man at a nearby table removed his watch and placed it in his pocket, its ticking suddenly seeming unnecessarily loud. "If we could all lower our voices just a bit, it would make a world of difference," Amara concluded. "Thank you for your understanding." As she stepped away, an older gentleman raised his hand. "Miss, could you bring some paper for my table too? My grandson draws. Maybe he and the young man could exchange pictures." Slowly, the atmosphere transformed. Conversations resumed, but at gentler volumes. A child from another table shyly approached with a colorful sticker to offer Malik. The hostility that had pervaded the corner dissolved into something resembling community. Through it all, Victor sat motionless, his eyes brimming with tears. His gaze followed Amara as she moved between tables, this woman who had done what his money and influence never could, created a space where his son could simply exist without judgment. As the meal concluded, Victor sat watching his son calmly coloring alongside another child who had joined their table. The knot that had lived permanently in his chest, the one that tightened every time they ventured into public, had loosened for the first time in years. Something broke open inside him, releasing emotions he'd long suppressed beneath his carefully constructed professional exterior. When Amara returned with their check, Victor found himself unable to speak. Tears flowed freely down his face, not the contained, dignified tears of a businessman showing appropriate emotion, but raw, unfiltered vulnerability. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Are you okay, sir?" Amara asked gently. Victor struggled to find words. "For years I've thrown money at our problems. The best doctors, therapists, schools. I built a company worth millions, yet I couldn't build a world where my son feels safe." He gestured around the restaurant. "What you did today, I couldn't buy that with all my wealth." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here sat Victor Sterling, whose net worth exceeded 8 figures, being shown the meaning of true wealth by a woman who probably earned less in a year than he did in a day. His expensive watch, designer suit, and premium credit cards, all the symbols he'd accumulated to represent success, suddenly seemed hollow compared to Amara's simple courage. "You know," she said, refilling his water glass, "I've learned that kindness doesn't cost anything, but its absence costs everything. What happened today wasn't about money or status. It was about seeing someone's humanity." Victor reached into his jacket and removed a thick envelope. "Please," he said, extending it toward her. "I want you to have this. It's not nearly enough for what you've done, but it might help with." Amara gently pushed the envelope back toward him. "Just pay it forward," she said with a smile that held no judgment, only warmth. "Next time you see someone struggling to belong in a world that wasn't built for them, stand up. Be their voice. That's worth more than anything in that envelope." In that moment, the distance between them, race, class, privilege, seemed to dissolve. They were simply two humans, recognizing each other's inherent value across the artificial boundaries society had constructed between them. Victor nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for further words. If this story has touched you, give this video a thumbs up right now. Have you ever had the courage to stand up for someone when others wouldn't? Or has someone ever stood up for you when you needed it most? Remember, it takes just one voice to change the atmosphere in a room, and sometimes that voice needs to be yours. Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Victor and Malik prepared to leave, the restaurant had transformed. The same space that had earlier felt hostile now hummed with a gentle awareness. Customers who had previously stared or whispered now smiled or nodded respectfully. Malik walked out, clutching his drawing and several new stickers, his steps lighter than when he'd entered. For Victor, the world looked fundamentally different. During the drive home, he gazed at his son in the rearview mirror and realized how much energy he'd spent trying to make Malik fit into society's narrow definition of normal, rather than challenging that definition itself. As a black man who had fought his way into predominantly white business circles, Victor had learned to code switch and adapt, believing that success meant conforming to established standards. He'd unconsciously applied that same philosophy to parenting, teaching Malik to mask his autism rather than teaching the world to accept his differences. "I've been fighting the wrong battle," he whispered to himself. Inside the Blue Magnolia, Amara's actions continued to resonate. The family who had shared their stickers with Malik left a note with their tip, "Thank you for the lesson in humanity today." The older gentleman who had suggested the drawing exchange stopped Amara to share that his grandson was recently diagnosed with autism, and today gave him hope for his future. Even the woman who had made the cruel comment approached Amara before leaving. "I was wrong," she admitted quietly. "I never considered what that child might be experiencing." Mr. Patterson, who had initially demanded Amara handle the situation, observed these interactions with growing discomfort. When the lunch rush ended, he called her into his office, his expression unreadable. "What you did today?" he began stiffly, then paused. "It wasn't what I expected. But it was right. I need to reconsider how we accommodate all our guests." This encounter illuminated truths that extended far beyond a single restaurant. In a society that often equated worth with wealth and status with skin color, Amara had demonstrated that dignity belongs to everyone by birthright, not by bank account. Her actions revealed how quickly we dismiss those who don't fit our expectations, whether a Black waitress, an autistic child, or a father struggling to protect his son. 2 weeks later, Malik asked to return to the Blue Magnolia. Victor was surprised but agreed, curious whether the positive experience would hold. When they arrived, Amara greeted them with recognition but no fanfare. Several staff members now wore small puzzle piece pins, the symbol for autism awareness, on their uniforms. The menu included a new section with sensory-friendly options, and a sign near the entrance invited guests with sensory sensitivities to request accommodations. For Malik, the restaurant had become a place where he could exist comfortably. For Victor, it represented something even more profound, a glimpse of what an inclusive world might look like, and a reminder that creating such a world begins with individual acts of courage and compassion. The story of Amara and Malik reminds us that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest actions. A waitress kneeling beside a distressed child. A simple drawing on a notepad. A few words spoken with quiet conviction. These moments may seem insignificant against the vast canvas of injustice in our world, yet they contain the seeds of transformation. What happened at the Blue Magnolia that rainy Thursday wasn't merely about helping one child through a difficult moment. It was about challenging the assumptions that divide us, assumptions about race, wealth, ability, and worth. When Amara chose to stand up rather than stand aside, she demonstrated that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more. Victor Sterling discovered that all his financial success couldn't buy what Amara gave freely: genuine compassion and the willingness to see his son's full humanity. His experience forces us to reconsider what true wealth means. Is it measured by the balance in our accounts, or by the depth of our connection to others? By what we accumulate, or by what we're willing to defend? Each of us faces moments where we must choose between comfortable silence and necessary action. In those moments, remember that your voice may be the only one defending someone's dignity. Your willingness to stand up might be the difference between a world that wounds and one that welcomes. Before you go, hit the subscribe button to join our community dedicated to sharing stories that matter. Have you witnessed or experienced a moment where someone's kindness changed everything? Share your story in the comments, because in sharing these moments, we create ripples of hope that extend far beyond our individual lives.